Hi everyone. Today I'm going to tell you about a case that happened in Costa Rica, in the province of Punta Arenas. Every year, thousands of people choose this area for a beach vacation and a chance to relax by the ocean. Costa Rica is widely seen as a popular tourist destination, but in this story, unfortunately, there was no happy ending. On July 18, 2020, Maria Luisa Cedeño arrived at La Mansión Inn in Manuel Antonio, in the canton of Quepos, Punta Arenas province. She was traveling with her beloved dog, Mafalda, a small companion who went everywhere with her, and whom Maria Luisa treated almost like a daughter. Nothing unusual happened that first day. Maria Luisa went to the beach, had lunch at the restaurant, had a few drinks. In other words, she was doing the same kinds of things most people do on vacation. But by the next day, everything had changed. At exactly 4:30 p.m., Maria Luisa asked to have a bottle of wine, mineral water, and 2 glasses brought to her room. That detail matters because she had told no one. She was going there with another person. Everyone around her believed she simply wanted some time away by herself. Throughout the day and evening, there was no recorded movement from her room. The next day, July 20th, hotel staff tried to contact her, but got no response. Earlier, one employee had spoken with Maria Luisa, and she told him that she lived alone because she had recently broken up with her partner, that she wasn't feeling very well, and that she was traveling only with her little dog, Mafalda. By then, several months had already passed since the start of the pandemic, and she said that had affected her deeply too. In particular, her mental health had been getting worse, and considering everything she had been through in life, she needed a break. That was why hotel staff decided to go into the room, just to make sure she was okay. The front door was locked from the inside, so they checked whether they could get in through the door leading to the inner courtyard. That room did in fact have a secondary exit, because it was intended for guests with pets, so dogs could be let outside. When staff reached that door, they found it partially open. As soon as they stepped inside, they noticed a terrible smell, and immediately saw blood in different parts of the room. The dog was alive. She was lying in a corner, trembling and staying away from the hotel employees, apparently either injured or terrified. On the bed was a motionless body wrapped in a bedsheet. That was how they found Maria Luisa Cedeño's lifeless body. Maria Luisa Cedeño Quesada was an anesthesiologist, and in her field, she was considered a highly respected professional. She was 43 years old at the time of her death, and worked as head of the anesthesiology and recovery department at Hospital Cima in Escazú. Her coworkers cared about her deeply. In the early months of the pandemic, Maria Luisa was fully devoted to her profession and wanted to help patients during a very difficult time. As a medical professional, she also did a great deal for her loved ones. She helped them arrange health insurance, schedule doctor appointments, figure out what to do, and in many ways, she was the person her family leaned on. Whenever she was able to help, she did. Her parents lived in La Fortuna de San Carlos, so she wasn't always able to be with her family as often as she wanted. Friends remembered her as a strong, intelligent, kind woman who loved to travel both around Costa Rica and abroad. She had an impeccable reputation. When news of her violent death spread through the country, it devastated her family. Who would want to kill someone like Maria Luisa? The questions in this case began from the very first moment. From the moment hotel staff found her body, and the crime scene was shocking, not only because of the brutality of what had been done to her, but also because of the question of how the killer had gotten into the room at all. Now let's move to the details discovered in this case, in room number 3 at the hotel. First, there was the issue of access. Like many hotels, this one kept records of the magnetic key cards used to open guest rooms. In other words, every time someone entered, the system logged which card had been used. That made it possible to tell whether it was a guest or a staff member. In Maria Luisa's case, there was not a single record showing that anyone had entered her room using a different key. Investigators were able to establish only one thing. The evening before, she entered her room, and after that, no one came in through the main door. Obviously, because there was a sliding glass door in the back, someone could have entered that way instead. That door was usually locked from the inside, so only the guest could have left it open or unlocked. But since that part of the room wasn't connected to the magnetic key system, there was no electronic record of anyone entering through the courtyard. That meant Maria Luisa either let someone in through the back door herself, or failed to lock it and someone came in later and killed her. And because the door was still partly open when hotel staff arrived, the most logical theory at the time was that someone saw Maria Luisa at the hotel, realized they could get in through the courtyard, went in, killed her, and left the same way. After the body was discovered, hotel staff called the police. Once investigators began examining the scene, it did not take long to understand that Maria Luisa Cedeño had in fact been murdered. Her body showed extensive injuries. It was clear she had been tortured before she died, and that whoever did this had acted with extreme brutality. Crime scene investigators were called in to collect evidence, determine the cause of death, and examine every detail, in the hope of identifying the person responsible. The level of violence was so severe that the Cedeño family was even advised to hold a closed casket funeral. The autopsy later showed that there were bite marks in several areas and 2 broken fingernails. That indicated Maria Luisa had tried to defend herself. Another key detail uncovered during the autopsy was that the killer had washed the body. In other words, after the murder, Maria Luisa had been moved into the bathroom. According to forensic investigators, she was killed in the bedroom, on the bed, which was consistent with the large amount of blood found there. After that, the body was taken to the bathroom, washed, dried off, wrapped in a sheet, and placed back on the bed. That was the condition in which hotel staff found Maria Luisa. Even though the killer had washed the body, possibly trying to remove evidence and hide traces of the crime, it was impossible to clean everything. There was blood everywhere, on the floor, on the walls, on the curtains, and on the bed. All of that only reinforced how violent the attack had been. Investigators photographed the scene, collected as much physical evidence as they could, then sent the body for autopsy. While police began interviewing hotel employees and guests who might have heard or seen something, based on what the scene showed, Maria Luisa should have been screaming, and her dog should have been barking, but no one reported hearing screams that night. Even though the hotel was nearly empty because of the pandemic, several employees were still working there, and the owner, Harry Badan, was staying on the property with his husband. He had also allowed several acquaintances to live at the hotel because they were having financial problems. Part of the reason was that during the pandemic, the hotel wasn't fully booked anyway, so letting friends stay there did not create much financial loss for him. In Maria Luisa's room, investigators found the bottle of wine she had ordered through room service and 2 glasses. Later, when her phone was examined, it turned out that she had sent a friend a photo of those 2 glasses, but she never said she was with anyone or waiting for anyone in the room. She also sent that same friend a voice message.
O sea, yo sí me mita, vieras qué bueno este hotel. Mae, como yo soy como, solo hay como, vemos como 2 huéspedes. Entonces, ¿cómo te explico que Mafalda es como la reina del lugar? Y además, o sea, me tratan demasiado bien. O sea, pagué una vara como de all inclusive que se pagan $100 extra. Y me traen agüita, me traen tragos, me traen todo, le traen agüita Mafalda, le traen un tarrito de agüita Mafalda, me traen fresas, me traen piñita. O sea, no tienes una idea lo chiva que está la chineazón aquí. Y, o sea, me ha encantado, o sea, estoy súper chineada, estoy hablando con el bartender, con el otro mae, con el asistente del dueño, que el dueño es holandés, entonces todo es como súper chiva. Mi amiga Raquel, o sea, y pagué 155,000 colones por noche con un all inclusive. O sea, que me dijeron que para la cena, para el all inclusive, puedo pedir de cenar de donde quiera y me lo traen. O sea, viera lo chiva que está. O sea, el lugar está más o menos, porque está como descuidadito, porque no tienen la mitad de los empleados y la misma muchacha que sirve el café es la que hace. O sea, pero vieras que las recomendaciones que me han dado son miles. La verdad es que ese lugar como lo que ocupaba está muy chido.
Later, when officers interviewed Maria Luisa's friends and relatives to find out whether she had any known enemies, authorities learned that she always asked for 2 glasses, even when she was completely alone. She did that because she poured alcohol into one and water into the other, so that seemed to confirm that she was alone that night. and was not expecting anyone, and that brought investigators back to the first theory. The attacker was most likely someone who saw Maria Luisa at the hotel, noticed the back door was open and took advantage of it. But at the same time, the level of violence made it seem like the person who did this had a deep hatred for her. In cases like this, it often feels like the crime was committed by someone who knew the victim and wanted to make her suffer. But there was no direct proof that Maria Luisa was with anyone or planning to meet anyone. The autopsy confirmed another horrifying detail. She had also been sexually assaulted. In addition, there were signs of strangulation, as well as injuries to her cheeks, lips, arms, and chest. After reviewing the autopsy findings, interviewing family members and friends, and questioning people who had been at the hotel, authorities came to believe that the attack most likely could not have been carried out by one person alone. No one heard Maria Luisa scream, so investigators concluded that there were probably at least two attackers who quickly subdued her. There was even discussion of a third person being involved, two men holding her down while a third assaulted her. That theory was supported by the fact that there were no marks on her body, suggesting she had been tied up with rope or anything similar. Officers also believed she may have had something forced into her mouth, so she could not scream, or so that no one would hear her if she did. The cause of death was ruled to be blunt force trauma to the head. That injury could have been caused in several ways: a hard blow to the head, a fall being struck with an object, or some other severe impact. There were also signs of vertebral fractures. Overall, what was done to Maria Luisa Cedeño was nothing short of savage. A brutal crime with no clear or obvious motive. The first suspect was identified fairly quickly. The reason was simple. This man, who had been living at the hotel, had multiple fresh injuries on his body, scratches and other marks that looked like the kind of wound someone might get in a struggle, with a victim fighting back. That man was Teodoro Herrera Martínez, an exotic dancer who worked in local nightclubs and was staying at the hotel at the time of the murder. He was placed in pre-trial detention while investigators worked to establish his connection to the case. Footprints found at the crime scene were compared with his, and two of them matched. Those prints were located in front of the bed in the bedroom, on the black porcelain floor. Not long after that, a second suspect was detained, Luis Carlos Miranda. He had a background in business administration. He was taken in after a hotel security guard said he had seen him walking through the hallways that night with the first suspect, Teodoro Herrera. In addition, testing showed that his dental records could not be ruled out in the comparison with the bite marks found on Maria Luisa's body. According to some hotel employees, they had seen Maria Luisa speaking with Luis Carlos and on one occasion with Herrera as well, but it appeared casual, not like they were friends or knew each other closely. Just brief exchanges saying hello, asking how things were going. That may simply have been because there were very few guests at the hotel, so they crossed paths more than once. Earlier, I mentioned that the hotel owner had allowed two acquaintances to stay on the property because of financial problems during the pandemic. Luis Carlos and Teodoro Herrera were those two men. Given the footprint matches and the bite mark evidence, the next logical step for police was to question Harry Baudon, the hotel owner. During that interview, he said that on the night of July 19, 2020, the night the murder took place, he and his husband had dinner in their apartment inside the hotel with the two suspects. After dinner, according to him, all four men went to the private pool. Harry also explained that both men were living there and helping him with the business. Luis Carlos handled the website and marketing, while Herrera worked as a cook and bartender. At first, the hotel owners and those two men were not especially close, but after they had been living on the property for about a year before the murder, they started spending more and more time together, having meals, talking, hanging out. Over time, a friendship developed between the four men. Even though Harry Baudon cooperated and gave an interview, he too was arrested in August 2020 because two bite marks found on the victim's body also could not rule him out based on his dental records. And that was when the case started taking a very different turn. Police seized the phones of everyone who had been detained and found text messages between Luis Carlos and Harry Baudon. The contents were highly incriminating because they involved some very dark fantasies. In those messages, Luis suggested that the hotel owner have sex with a woman while he watched. Those texts had been exchanged just days before the murder. The suspects claimed the messages meant nothing and were just jokes. But for investigators, combined with the other evidence, that was enough to keep them in custody while the case was being prepared for trial. The only person who was not arrested was the hotel owner's husband, because there was no evidence against him, no texts, no prints, and no bite mark comparisons linking him to the victim. The defense argued that the bite marks on the victim's body were unreliable evidence and did not actually prove that any of the men had directly participated in the murder. Even so, all three men were charged in Maria Luisa Cedeño's killing. Before the trial began, Harry Badan's attorney asked for his client to be released and placed under house arrest for two reasons. First, the country was in the middle of the pandemic. Harry was 69 years old, and the defense argued that keeping him in jail put him at risk. Second, they claimed he had serious mobility problems following a recent knee surgery. His lawyers said he had been walking with a cane for a long time, and by the time the trial began, he appeared in a wheelchair. In the end, he was granted house arrest and returned to the hotel where he lived. He could not leave, but in practice he was staying in comfortable conditions while he waited for trial. On September 13, 2022, the public trial of the defendants began, and testimony against them was heard. It was during those proceedings that prosecutors ran into major problems, trying to prove the involvement of Harry Badan and Luis Carlos Miranda. As a reminder, the evidence against them included the text messages and the suspected bite mark matches. But the problem was that bite marks by themselves cannot definitively establish who committed a crime. At best, they can exclude some people rather than positively identify one specific person. So what investigators had was this. Some hotel employees could be ruled out, but those two men could not. Still, that was not enough to treat the bite marks as conclusive proof. The case against Teodoro Herrera was very different. There was far more evidence against him. There was a blood trail, and there were injuries on his body that investigators concluded had been inflicted by Maria Luisa while she fought back. His blood was found under the victim's fingernails. Blood was also found on his shoes, watch, and cell phone, all recovered from his room during the search. In the end, Herrera was the only one convicted. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison, while Harry Badan and Luis Carlos Miranda were acquitted for lack of physical evidence. A lot of people believe those two men were still involved in the murder, partly because the hotel's surveillance cameras mysteriously stopped working on the day of the crime. That raises the possibility that someone deliberately set it up that way. Another person also came under suspicion, the hotel's security guard. But just like with the other two, there was not enough direct evidence to arrest him. It was also considered suspicious that after the murder, he left for another country, even though police had asked him to appear as a witness at trial. There are still many things in this case that make it seem like more people may have been involved. For example, two hotel guests told police that the power went out for several hours that night. And that may have been done on purpose, first, so the cameras would stop working, and second, so the magnetic key system would go down as well. Another strange detail is that the hotel owner's private office was not searched until 9 days after the murder. And of course, that could have given someone plenty of time to remove anything incriminating. In addition to the text messages, investigators also reviewed the suspect's social media accounts. There too, they found conversations about fantasies that closely echoed the condition in which Maria Luisa's body was later found. Even so, the only person who ultimately ended up in prison for the murder was Herrera. And although the case was considered solved on paper, the Cedeño family believes there is still more to it. That someone was protected, that something was covered up. They said Maria Luisa's belongings were returned to them covered in blood. And they could not understand why, since those items could still have mattered as evidence if new information ever came to light. The family was, of course, satisfied that Herrera had been convicted, but they could not accept the acquittals of Harry Badan and Luis Carlos Miranda. On October 25, 2023, the acquittal of Harry Badan and Luis Carlos Miranda was overturned. On June 28, 2024, a higher court confirmed that a new trial still had to take place, but no date for that retrial was ever set. On March 20, 2025, Teodoro Herrera's sentence was reviewed and increased to 89 years. On September 12, 2025, that 89-year sentence was upheld. But behind all of those dates is one human life. Maria Luisa was a doctor, a daughter, and a sister. A person who simply wanted a little time to rest and never came back. If you found this video interesting and useful, support it with a like and subscribe. Until the next story, we're not saying goodbye.